who I first met when he was at Sonoma State a few years back.
Just a few.
He's worked for over 11 years with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association as their legislative director. In this capacity, he is in the state capitol continuously writing position letters and testifying on hundreds of bills. Dozens of these would have demolished the protections of Prop 13, leading to higher taxes for millions of property owners. His other responsibilities include putting together an annual report card for all 120 legislators, speeches to local taxpayer groups, and contributing to the Howard Jarvis Tax Association quarterly publication, Taxing Times. He has also worked on a variety of initiative campaigns, including to defeat taxes and advocate for property rights. So David, I'm real glad you're here. And how old is this baby?
4 months.
4 months. This is a new father here. Take it away, David.
Eddie, thank you so much. And yeah, it's been a wild ride. This is, I guess just for starters, a bit of a homecoming for me. As Eddie mentioned, I am a Sonoma State grad. I grew up in the Bay Area, Marin County, and made the short trip up to Sonoma State for college and graduated in 2005 with a history degree. And then moved to Sacramento and started working in politics, first in the legislature and then for Howard Jarvis, and actually also have my own lobbying firm. I've had it for the last 30 years.
Okay.
So get to dabble in all sorts of stuff. But, you know, I met Eddie, I think, gosh, in the run-up to the 2004 election, just getting involved with the Sonoma County Party. I was the founding president of the College Republican Club at Sonoma State, and so that was how I got to meet a lot of party members, and then I also worked on Pat Kruger's state assembly campaign, if anyone remembers her, you know, back in 2004. So yeah, no, so it's been a blast being able to work in politics and fight for the conservative cause here all up and down the state. And as Eddie mentioned, I do have a 4-month-old daughter, so I'm a little sleep deprived. If I start slurring the words and whatnot, you know, raise your hand and knock me silly, and you know, we'll make it happen. But it's actually been a wild ride with her too. She was a 13-week preemie and was in the NICU for 15 weeks. She weighed 1 pound 13 ounces. So yeah, thankfully, very good health, doing well. Neonatal care has come a long way since I was a preemie, you know, 37 years ago. So, I mean, we're just very thankful.
How much does she weigh now?
7 pounds, 9 ounces.
Really good.
Yeah, it is really, really good, and she's doing well. But, you know, every day in the hospital is a long thing. So this is actually the first speech I've given in 3.5 months, too. So we'll see how all this goes. This will be fun. Yeah, so thanks for giving me that little introduction. Typically what I do with these speeches is speak for about a half an hour and then take questions. I know some people have to leave early, so if you do need to leave early, I'll take your questions first. And we'll just roll through the room and see how it goes. You're good with that, right, Eddie?
I'm loose.
You're loose. I love this woman. She's great. Super flexible. So, happy birthday, Prop 13, right? 41 years this month. And without really a major victorious assault against it. There was the lowering of the 2/3 vote for school facility bonds back in 2000, but that actually has nothing to do with Prop 13. The 2/3 for bonds has actually been in place since 1879, so it predated Prop 13 by about 100 years. So yeah, Prop 13 remains, even after 41 years, without a lot of negative impact, but it does not mean politicians are not trying to hit it and go after it every single moment of every single day, and I'll come back and talk about that a little bit later. So I always have to ask, what is Prop 13? And I always have to ask this because I remember interviewing a legislator, and I'm not going to name who this guy is, but, you know, about my age. And I thought he was a little bit nervous, so I thought I'd start him out with sort of a softball question. And I said, well, what are your thoughts on Prop 13? And he's like, what's Prop 13? And I'm like, oh my goodness, okay. So, yeah, anyway. But all that to say, right, I always have to lay out what Proposition 13 is, because you never know. I mean, shoot, I wasn't even born when it passed. So, Prop 13 does two things. It sets a 1% cap on the price at which you bought your home or business, and increases that by an inflation-adjusted factor of no more than 2% a year. And it also establishes a 2/3 vote for any taxes approved by the legislature, as well as any special taxes. So things like transportation, sales taxes here in Sonoma County require a 2/3 vote because of Proposition 13. It's important also to lay out what life was like before Proposition 13 was around. It was not uncommon in the years prior to 1978 for seniors who were, on fixed incomes for the most part, to get kicked out of their homes even after they had paid off their mortgages. And that was precisely because they could not afford the property taxes. We have letters in our office actually from people who are like handwritten letters, back when they still did that kind of thing. Like, you kept me in my home. You literally kept me in my home. And, this new generation, doesn't understand the gravitas, I think, of what that really means. What that really means to live out your golden years and still have the American dream at your fingertips. And that's what makes Prop 13, I think, so important and so powerful. But that was not uncommon in the years before 1978. So it's also important to note Prop 13 helps everybody. Common critique and phone call we get into our office is, oh, I only benefit from Prop 13 if I've owned my home or business since 1978, right? Not true. Absolutely fundamentally not true. Every single property owner in the state of California benefits from Proposition 13. Now, I've owned my home for 6 years, okay? And, the way we calculate this in our office is, instead of a 2% cap in the years prior to 1978, it was like a 2.6, 2.8% cap. So we take that in order to figure out kind of what your property tax savings would be over the course of 40 years. Now, if you've owned your home since 1978, you've saved about $180,000 on your property taxes as a direct result of Proposition 13. But if you're like me, based on that calculation, and you've owned your home for the last 6 years, you've saved about $25,000 as a direct result of Proposition 13. And again, that's based on that calculation that I laid out. Not an exact science, but it sort of gives you a good approximation. But yeah, Prop 13 helps everyone, right? It helps renters, because obviously apartment complexes fall into the 1% for commercial property tax rates. So that helps keep rents low. And I think what people forget, and especially those in local government, is just how much it helps local government. Every single time I'm in a hearing on Prop 13, the local government, League of Cities, California State Association of Counties, etc., they want to demolish Prop 13. And it's easy to see why they want to demolish Prop 13. Use my hands, make an example. So, year 2000 rolls around, property values shooting up, right? 10% a year, each and every year, blah, blah, blah. Prop 13 assessed valuation at 2% a year, 2%, 2%, market value 10%, 2%, 2%. Local governments get upset because they want that extra revenue that they're not getting. But what they forget, and what I always remind them of, is that what goes up must come down. 2000 was great. 2008, not so great. Bottom falls out of housing market, right? Shoom. Drops by like 10% a year in 2008, 9, 10, and 11. And in some counties and municipalities a lot longer than 2011 too, right? Now, if, let's say you bought your home in 2008, right? So you're right at the top of the market. Values decline. You may have seen your property taxes decline in those years if you've owned your home since 2008. And that's because you're entitled to a temporary property tax reduction in the years where your assessed valuation, where the market valuation falls below your assessed valuation, your Prop 13 assessed valuation. So the market value falls, your assessed valuation is up here where you bought it. You're entitled to a temporary property tax reduction per the Constitution. Now, In 2012, this is another question we get in our office, right, is when property values shoot back up, we got a lot of calls in our office in 2012, 2013 saying, hey, my property taxes went up by more than 2% a year. And that's because they're allowed to, until it gets back up to that original assessed valuation point. So it was not uncommon for property taxes maybe to go up 15 or 20% in a given year in 2009, 10, and 11 as property values recovered. But once it gets back up to that assessed valuation point, it's 2% a year, 2% a year. Why is that important for local governments? Local governments, 70% of their revenue comes from property and sales taxes. 70% on average. Sales taxes are obviously very volatile depending on swings and ups and downs in the economy. So property taxes become very important, okay? If you've owned your home since 2000, you probably did not get a property tax reduction in the last recession. Kind of depends on where you live and stuff like that. But if you've owned your home since 2000 or before, you probably did not get a reduction in your property taxes. What does that mean? The only year in the last housing market recession where the statewide assessment roll declined was in 2008. In 2009 and 10 and 11 and 12, the statewide assessment roll increased. And that's precisely because of what I just laid out. If you've owned your home or business since 2000, you're still going to be paying that 2% in the middle of the worst housing market crash since the Great Depression. That speaks, ladies and gentlemen, to the stability of Proposition 13 for local governments. They know there will always be a stable source of revenue for property taxes in the economy. Now, it took individual counties, in some cases, a lot longer to recover than 2009 and 10 and 11 and 12. But it's so instructive to me that, the only year where the statewide assessment roll declined was in 2008. Speaks to Prop 13's easing revenue volatility within property taxes. Does that make sense? It's really, really important to lay that out. We are a nonpartisan organization. 1/3 of our members are actually registered Democrats. Another 20% roughly are declined to state. Now those are, blue dog Democrats primarily, not your Gavin Newsom style Democrat, but it's instructive because there is nothing partisan about taxes or Proposition 13. And Proposition 13 remains popular, according to a recent PPIC poll, not necessarily a conservative polling group, shows majority vote approval and support for Prop 13 across the state, with the exception of the San Francisco Bay Area. Not a big surprise there, right? But among all age groups, even 18 to 29-year-olds who don't own houses. So, again, and Prop 13, again, continues to have 62% support today in that same poll overall. It passed with 64% in 1978. So, I don't think we're doing that bad. We're continuing to spend tens of thousands of dollars a year reaching out to newer homeowners to keep on passing the torch and help to educate a new generation about the values of Proposition 13, and life goes on. I already talked about the one major objection to Prop 13, which is that I only benefit from Prop 13 if I've owned my home since 1978. We've dealt with that. The other one I want to talk about real briefly, though, is that that's not fair argument. It's not fair that someone who bought the same size and price home as me, 20 years after I did, pays double or triple the amount of property taxes. That's not fair, right? Except it is. In a case that actually went to the United States Supreme Court, Nordlinger versus Hahn, Stephanie Nordlinger was a property owner in Los Angeles. Gary Hahn was at that point the Los Angeles County assessor. The Supreme Court ruled in that case that Prop 13's acquisition value-based system, which is again 1% plus 2% a year, right, is inherently fair. And it's fair because you know when you buy your home or business exactly what you're going to be paying in property taxes, okay? And you know that when you buy the house, and you know that 5, 10, 20, 30 years down the line. Now, bonds and personal taxes are not factored in that 1% cap, and that's a whole other issue, and I'll come back to that too. Those are added in above and beyond the Prop 13 1% cap, which is why when you see 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 on your property tax bill, that extra 0.2 or 0.3 is because of those bonds and parcel taxes. And we're not saying necessarily that those are evil, but remember, those are on your property tax bill for 20, 30, 40 years. Keep in mind the debt that you vote on, because you have to pay it. So, keeping an eye on the clock too. Attacks on Prop 13, right? There are two in the legislature at present, and one that's already made the ballot for 2020. So I'm going to run through all three of these. Assembly Constitutional Amendment 1, which is an active bill pending a vote on the Assembly floor, could come up for a vote any day now or not. It just sort of depends whether or not they have the votes. But what that does, it lowers the 2/3 vote for bonds and personal taxes to fund various infrastructure projects from 2/3, which is what it is now, to 55%. That's important because, like I mentioned, everything beyond Prop 13's 1% cap factors in. So you make it easier to pass bonds and parcel taxes, your property taxes are going up. Okay? Important to keep in mind a handful of things, right? Bonds and parcel taxes, everybody gets to vote on them, right? Only property owners pay, right? Only property owners pay bonds and parcel taxes, but everyone gets to vote on them. This is especially egregious for parcel taxes because they're very regressive in that you pay the same amount of money regardless of how long, regardless of your ability to pay, right? But regardless of how big your property is. So if you own a 2-bedroom bungalow, you're going to pay the same parcel tax as someone who owns a $1 million mansion. Again, regardless of your ability to pay. Incredibly regressive. There's also the importance of maintaining the 2/3 vote for both bonds and parcel taxes, but especially parcel taxes. In a quote that's often attributed to Ben Franklin, he said, "Democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner." One of my favorite quotes. It gets laughs every time I use it in the legislature, which is great. It's one of the few times I laugh. But now that's not to call taxpayers sheep, right? But taxpayers need to be protected. The 2/3 vote ensures that they are protected. That's especially true when only 55% of the state are in fact homeowners. In California, we are 10 points below the national average on that front. And that strikes directly at housing affordability and the affordable housing crisis in the state. I'm not going to have time to talk about that today, but if you want me to start spewing stuff out, I do think it is the #1 issue today facing the state of California is home affordability and cost of living generally. The biggest issue, and it's driving people out of here. So that's ACA1. SCA5 is the other attack on Prop 13. And that is a little bit more narrow in focus, I guess. It lowers the 2/3 vote to 55% just for education parcel taxes. Okay, so just for parcel taxes for schools to fund things like teachers and classroom supplies and other things. The only thing I'll say about that, I sort of covered, the arguments are basically the same on that. The only thing I'll say about this is it's not difficult to get a 2/3 vote if you campaign effectively. Okay, a majority of parcel taxes statewide over the last 3 elections on the local level have been approved. Now, we're not enamored as an association, obviously, if a bunch of parcel taxes get approved locally. But, on the other hand, if you get a 2/3 vote, man, it clearly demonstrates that you want to tax yourself to provide XYZ services. Now, but that's not just here either. You would expect that here. You would expect that in the Bay Area. You would not expect it in Orange County, who passed a transportation sales tax twice with a 2/3 vote to fund various road projects. Which is because they trust their government to provide the service. That's the only way you get a 2/3 vote, you know, for these types of things. So, you know, maintaining that threshold is incredibly important. Now, split roll is the third attack on Proposition 13. Now, you're probably sitting there asking yourself, split roll, what in the world is the gentleman talking about? It's a good question. How many people have heard of split roll? Okay. Per capita, that's about the number of people who usually raise their hands, so that's good. So, split roll, there's a lot of different ways you can do a split roll. In essence, what we're talking about when we mention split roll is Proposition 13, you'll recall, set a uniform 1% property tax cap for both residential and commercial properties from 1978 going forward. Now, property taxes were actually uniform well before Proposition 13, for, in fact, 70, 80, 90 years. Prop 13 just altered that uniformity and established a 1% cap. A split roll alters that uniformity, specifically for commercial properties. Now, there's a lot of different ways you could do a split roll. You wouldn't even have to amend the Constitution to do this example. You could alter the classifications of properties. So you could say for a certain group of industrial properties, you could tax them at a different classification. Minnesota actually does this and has literally hundreds of different property tax classifications, you know, on commercial and industrial property that they use to jack up taxes. So that's one way you could do a split roll. Let me just think what the other one is. Oh, you could also adjust Prop 13's 1% cap to something higher for commercial properties. So instead of 1%, you could bump it up to, you know, 1.5 or 2%, or even all the way up to market value if you wanted to, right? So that would be maybe a cleaner way to do a split roll for the assessors, because they could just recalculate all the property taxes for all the commercial buildings and do it that way. It wouldn't be cleaner for taxpayers, but it would be cleaner to enforce if they did something like that. So that would be another way to do a split roll. Or you could do like what's being proposed on the November 2020 ballot and establish a split roll like this, where in essence property taxes are adjusted upward to market value every 3 years for commercial property. Now, there are exceptions to this, right? You know, to the market value being reset every 3 years. Residential property is not included in this equation. Agriculture is not included in this initiative. Apartments are not included in this initiative. If you own a strip mall of, let's say, or a commercial property of less than $2 million, that is not included. But if you own multiple strip malls or buildings cumulatively across the state of California that total a market value of more than $2 million, you are subject to this. So, supporters, does that all make sense? You guys all tracking with me there? Yeah. Okay. So
that's a way to get more taxes, isn't it?
Well, of course it is, yeah. So they estimate that the split roll proposal that I just laid out, which again is on the November 2020 ballot, it does not have a number yet, but that will be the creme de la creme initiative on the November 2020 ballot. The only thing that might rise to that at this point is the potential return of rent control on the ballot. They're talking about bringing that back, as well as repealing the death penalty could also reappear again on this ballot in November. So, but split roll is going to dominate time and money and airways. We're talking between the two sides probably $100 million, maybe even closer to $150 million campaign. The opposition claims they'll be able to do $100 million in their own right, and I think based on the business community support, they probably will. But Eddie's right. you know, we're talking $6, $7, $8 billion a year, maybe even more, as a result of this initiative. And supporters are running around saying, it's all about the 1%, those greedy corporations, blah, blah, blah. But listen, you're not going to raise $6, $7, $8 billion going after Fortune 500 companies. The money is just not going to be there. The only way you get the money is to go after small businesses. And this initiative, by targeting owners of strip malls with a market value of over $2 million, will hit exactly that. If you are a small business with a triple net lease, and you happen to be in a strip mall with a value of over $2 million, you think the owner's going to eat that? No. No. He will attempt to eat most of it, but he's going to pass it on to his businesses, who in turn are going to pass it on to consumers. You guys know the drill. I don't need to tell you this, common economics 101. So that's what's going on with this. And you may also ask, why is Howard Jarvis opposed to this? Because after all, this doesn't go after residential homeowners or apartment complexes. Why do we care? Why do we care?
It does. It does go after the homeowner. I'll tell you why. I'm a realtor, and I can tell you that if one of my clients owns the Dunkin' Donuts in the mall, okay, he's now got to pay more to run his business. He can't afford his mortgage payment.
Sure. I mean, but that's an indirect impact. I mean, the point is there is no direct impact. So why do we care, right? Because it doesn't go after homeowners. We care because it's a slippery slope.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Today they come after commercial property. Tomorrow they come after you.
Yeah.
You know, tomorrow they come after homeowners. And yes, the owner of the Dunkin' Donuts franchise is going to get hammered if this passes, and may well have to move between split roll and minimum wage and, you know, workers' comp and God knows what else. You know, that's what you get. I have 8 minutes, which is perfect. This is why I only have 3 pages worth of notes, because I typically find that's kind of all I need. Yeah, that about covers that. You know what? Anybody have any questions about just the attacks on Prop 13? Because that, or Prop 13 in general? Because that basically is why I'm here. And keep in mind with the special assessments, at least you get an opportunity to vote on them. You know, and that is...
They all go through though.
Well,
most of them do. And if people love Prop 13 so much, which is very, you can talk to anybody, they like Prop 13.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to mind voting yes on every screwball assessment bill that goes across their faces.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, I think...
And they know it's gonna raise somebody's taxes.
I think people know, but I think there is a disconnect there. And I think the disconnect, quite frankly, one of the reasons is escrow accounts. If you never look at your property tax bill, you don't know what's on it. And how many people actually do that?
I pay
Look
my
at it.
property
Look
tax.
at it.
No, I mean, I do that as a matter of course, obviously, because it would be, you know, job suicide for me not to do that, I suppose. But, malpractice, if you will. But, no, but I think a lot of, you know, sub-40 millennial homeowners, you know, those that exist, you know, don't do that. You know, and I know a bunch of sub-40 homeowners that have no idea what's on their property tax bill. And even if they look at it, they have no idea what's on it, or why their property taxes went up, whether it was subject to the 2% a year, or because of the mosquito abatement special assessment, or because of the bonds and parcel taxes, or whatever. So, yeah, I mean...
If you have an escrow account and and it's paid every month through whoever your are you even getting a property tax bill?
You do get a statement.
Oh, yeah.
You do get a statement?
You do get a statement from the county. You do.
Yep.
You do, but if you know it's already being paid, how closely are you going to look at it? You know, and if you can manage the payments and figure all that out, you know. So, but yeah, valid point. But again, thank you, lucky stars, you get the chance to vote on this. You know, because there was a time prior to when Prop 218 passed when you weren't able to do that. And, they would just lump, take mosquito abatement and landscape and lighting districts, cities and counties, and just dump it in the general fund. And Prop 218 in 1996, the, follow-up to Prop 13 ended that, thankfully. Any other questions? Yeah.
What do you say when people argue that Prop 13 is one of the reasons there's a housing shortage because people stay in their homes longer? And are they trying to do a fix for that? And what's your take on that? So seniors can move to smaller houses, for instance, things like that.
Yeah, so there are a couple of different initiatives, and that's a very good question. There are a couple of different constitutional amendments in play right now in the legislature, as well as one that was on last November's ballot, Proposition 5, that failed. There is a proposal in the legislature that we are opposed to basically end the parent-child transfer that's been in place since 1986, unless the child decides to live in the home. For us, that's a private property, and I get where that probably makes sense to a lot of people. For us, that's a private property argument. Individuals should be able to decide what to do with their own property. And if the child doesn't want to live in the home, he or she shouldn't be forced to sell it, because property taxes are going to be reset to market value if they don't, which is in essence what would happen. But also, it's a double taxation sort of argument, in the sense that if you rent out your home, let's say it's an Airbnb, you're already supposed to collect income taxes, on that. Cities and counties in the state are still getting income tax revenue off the rental income, in theory. But now you're going to double whammy them with a property tax increase up to market value. You want to talk about affordable housing situations. There's a bunch of, children who inherit homes, right, who then rent them out at very reasonable rates because of the lower property taxes. So beware of the double-edged sword on that front. Municipalities might get more property tax revenue in the short term, but what are you losing in terms of home affordability costs and other things? So that is SCA, Senate Constitutional Amendment 3. That is currently percolating and working its way through the legislature. Proposition 5 was a measure sponsored by the realtors that Howard Jarvis also supported that was defeated last November. And that enhanced what we like to call portability. Okay, so current law allows individuals over the age of 55 to sell their house, move to a home of equal or lesser value within the same county in which they currently reside, or to 11 other counties across the state. Don't ask me to name those counties. I don't remember all of them. Orange County I know is one, Riverside is another. But yeah, so transferring the base value of your property to a home of equal or lesser value, you can only do it one time under current law. And that's it. Yeah.
Keep your tax base.
And you keep your tax base, right. Obviously, you keep your Prop 13 tax base, moving to a home of equal or lesser value. Portability offered up by the realtors was unique because it said if you were over the age of 55, you could transfer either the base value of your property to a home of equal or lesser value, or a portion of it to a home of greater value. Okay? You could do it in any county in the state an unlimited number of times. Complete, wonderful flexibility for people over the age of 55. That's a huge deal because with individuals living longer, listen, you can't assume that you're going to move at 55 or 60 and even want to stay in the same house for 15, 20, 30 years. Grandkids may move, you may want to move with them. Why should you not be able to? Portability would be amazing. You want to talk about churning up the housing market, that would do it. That would do it, I think, to a great impact. Now, is it going to solve the affordable housing crisis faced by the state of California? Of course not. We need to build 180,000 units of new housing a year, not just homes, not just apartments, not just infill, all types of homes. All types. I mean, shipping containers if you want, it doesn't really matter. 180,000 units of new housing a year just to keep pace with demand. Last year, we built 110. On average, over the last 5 years, we've built 90,000. To put all that in perspective, there has only been 4 years in the last 20 where the state of California has constructed at least 180,000 units of new housing. And yet Gavin Newsom wants to do 350,000, sorry, too many zeros, of new properties and development while he's in office. And it's not going to happen. Not at the rate things are going. Not with permit costs at $100,000, depending on where you live. Not with a lack of CEQA exemptions. My favorite, and you guys all know what CEQA is, right? The California Environmental Quality Act.
I was wondering what that was.
Signed into law by Ronald Reagan when he was governor of California, believe it or not. A well-intentioned law, I would argue, when it passed, to provide some economic protections, especially for coastal development. But like most things, it's been abused and it now runs amok. My favorite CEQA lawsuit, and again, anybody can file a lawsuit to derail development for a mere $200, $300. Can file a CEQA lawsuit to derail development. My favorite CEQA lawsuit was a property owner in Redwood City, here on the peninsula. Habitat for Humanity wanted to come in and build a small housing complex. Obviously, volunteer labor, no costs beyond the permit fees, right? No development costs, no building costs, none of that. Wanted to come in and build this housing development, right? Very small. This lawyer filed a CEQA lawsuit on the grounds that the development would block his view. Now, is that lawsuit eventually going to be thrown out of court? Probably, right?
Hope so.
But it may take 1 year, or 2 years, or 3 years for that to happen. And in the meantime, Habitat for Humanity walks away. CEQA is not killing these projects, but it delays them long enough where everyone's just like, well, what the heck? If you're a developer, why am I here? So, I mean, it's, I'm getting off topic, but portability would help the affordable housing crisis. It did not pass because the Legislative Analyst's Office came back and said that the cost would be $1 billion to the state general fund, and of lost property tax revenue. And what they did is they took into account the lower property taxes from the purchase of the new home. The lower property taxes for municipal governments from transferring your property tax base. They did not take into account, though, the sale of the home you just sold. And the fact that that would have been boosted up to market value because of Proposition 13. And there would be higher property taxes as a result of that. We think internally, especially after a period of 3 or 4 years, and there have been studies that have shown the whole thing is a wash from a revenue property tax standpoint. So the realtors are working on attempting to qualify a measure for the 2020 ballot. Getting rid of the parent-child transfer would be a part of that initiative. Because it hasn't made the ballot yet, the jury is still out on that from where we're coming from, because on one hand, we like portability, but on the other hand, we don't really like getting rid of the intergenerational child transfer. So, I'm going to punt on that one, but hopefully that answers your question, probably to a greater degree than what you wanted. Let me, unless anyone has other questions.
Now, let me ask you one, David,
Yeah.
what other hot issues does the Howard Jarvis Foundation deal with? Anything else besides the property tax issues and Prop 13?
Yeah, so I was actually going to delve into the other taxes if no one had any other Prop 13 related issues, and I'll try and wrap up here real quick, and I can take other questions. So yeah, the answer is yes. So current taxes this year, okay. Last year was interesting. Last year was actually only the third year in the last 6 years where the legislature did not approve any taxes. Last year. This year, not so much. And a lot of that has to do with a 2/3 Democrat supermajority in both houses of the legislature. 54 votes are needed in the assembly to get a 2/3 vote. Democrats now have 61. And in the Senate, 27 votes are needed for a 2/3 vote, and Democrats have 29. So there's a solid 2/3 supermajority in both houses of the legislature. And yet, the Prop 13 attacks, at least to this point, are not moving as quickly as we might have thought, given the circumstances. And I think, again, that speaks volumes as to the popularity of Prop 13 statewide. But there are other taxes that are moving through. Let me give you two examples, okay? There are two recent taxes that were proposed that both deal with public safety issues, okay? We believe that protecting public safety is the first role of government, okay? It is the first role of government. It should have the first call on general fund revenues. And for that reason, we don't engage a ton on how the legislature spends general fund revenue. You know, we figure the money comes in, they can choose how to spend it. But the minute that's not enough, and the minute you raise taxes, that's a problem, right? So that's kind of where we draw the line, especially with a majority vote budget now after Prop 25 passed back in 2008. We really can't do anything with the budget anyway, frankly. But listen, it's a record $130 billion general fund budget. If you factor in special funds, DMV fees, off-roading fees, other fees, it's over $200 billion. It's a lot of money. Okay? It's a lot of money. There should be enough to fund necessary public safety improvements with a record $130 billion general fund budget without raising taxes. So two examples, right? The current 911 system, and this is a big deal for residents of Sonoma County as we sit right here in Santa Rosa. The 911 system is decades old, okay? It cannot accept text messages. It cannot accept video, okay? It needs to be updated. It needs to be replaced. It can't accurately pinpoint, depending on what county you live, cell phones, you know, which is a big deal if you need to evacuate people really, really quickly. This was a tax, this 911 tax that was introduced last year. It did not get a 2/3 vote. It did not have Republican support. It did get a 2/3 vote this year, and it did have Republican support. Now, the two Republicans who voted for it, with, you know, to be fair to them, were both from Paradise and represented Paradise. So, in some respects, I understand the vote. But let me explain the tax, and I think you'll see why we opposed it and why it's not a good deal for taxpayers. To upgrade the 911 system statewide, okay, with the new digital infrastructure, one-time cost of roughly $150 million, and then some slight costs going forward to implement the system across all counties. Nominal amount of money, okay? If you have a landline, a 911 fee of roughly 19 cents a month is on your bill, okay? Cell phones, digital devices that access the internet have proliferated in obviously the last 15 or 20 years. There is no 911 tax on or surcharge on your cell phone bill or on your digitally connected device bill. So the legislature thought it fair to put one on. And they estimated that you know, the cost to fund the system and have a 911 tax would be about 32 cents a month. And arguably, if they kept it at 32 cents a month, it might be okay. They gave the legislature, with a 2/3 vote, the authorization to impose up to 80 cents per month tax on all cell phone users across the state of California. That will generate roughly $400 million a year on a permanent basis every year, when half of that is needed to fund this system. You know, so yeah, and so we opposed it on those grounds. Another tax we opposed that thankfully did not pass this year was the water tax. And more of you have no doubt heard of that. $1 a month water tax on pretty much every homeowner, ranging up to $10 a month for heavy commercial or industrial water users. $1 a month. Now, precedent-setting water tax. No other state in the nation does this. Now, this was a rare situation where Howard Jarvis was in league with the Association of California Water Agencies, or ACWA, which oversees hundreds of local water agencies, including here in Sonoma County, all across the state. ACWA was opposed to this because water agencies are not used to forwarding money up to the state. They're used to collecting ratepayer dollars and spending those funds internally to improve service, right? The cost to transfer this $1 a month up to the state, and by the way, this would generate about $175 million a year, would cost at least $100 million a year of additional cost for water agencies across the state just to forward the money up to Sacramento. Brutal, right? Brutal for them. So, why is this a big deal? Because again, this is a public safety issue. There are 1 million people right now in the Central Valley without access to clean water. That's not a joke. That's not a Democrat liberal ploy. That is an actual thing. There are 1 million people in Visalia, in Patterson, in the Central Valley without access to clean water. Now, a lot of that's because politicians have blown off the problem for the last 7, 8, or 9 years. A lot of it has to do with excessive nitrates and fertilizer in the soil due to agriculture use. There's a lot of different factors in play on this. But the fact remains that that is true. So $1 a month water tax was what was proposed. To fix this infrastructure problem in those areas in the Central Valley, across the state of California, would cost roughly $140 million of one-time money to fix it. The legislature proposed a permanent tax increase of that $1 a month, which would raise about $140 million a year. The only thing was, that's a permanent tax too. So that money just continues ongoing also. Howard Jarvis worked with ACWA, worked with local water agencies, and we don't partner with them very often because they like to go after Prop 13 because they want more money too. But we were able to partner effectively with them on this, and we were very grateful for that. So basically, the legislature said, for this specific issue, hey, we have a $130 billion general fund. This is a serious public safety issue that impacts the state. Maybe we should use general fund dollars to fund this. Novel concept, right? So, in the budget that was just passed, $100 million will go to cleaning up water across the state of California using cap and trade funds, which we would argue is a better use of that money than high-speed rail, which is what cap and trade funds are going to currently, as well as a $30 million appropriation from the general fund. And that is an ongoing appropriation, which means it will be in future budgets also. And it guarantees $130 million out of the cap and trade funds to fund these water projects in any given year. Yay. Right? Legislature got some common sense. So we can all be very, very happy about that. Other taxes real quick. And pretty much all of these are dead, which is kind of neat. The ones that aren't dead, I will give you more detail. Assembly Bill 18 placed a $25 tax on the purchase of a new firearm. That is dead for the year.
Okay.
Assembly Bill 138 imposed a 2-cent per ounce tax on sugary beverages, sweetened beverages, not just soda, but all sorts of sweetened beverages, including juices. 2 cents an ounce doesn't seem like very much, but if imposed, this would generate $2 billion a year of new revenue. We drink a lot of soda evidently.
Wow.
And that bill is also dead for the year. Soda lobby, it turns out, is pretty aggressive, believe it or not. Assembly Bill 142, this bill is still active, did get Republican votes as it passed out of the Assembly, adds an additional $1 tax at the point of sale for the purchase of a new car battery, and so it increases it to $2, and then beginning in 2023 makes that permanent. So that is AB 142. That bill is currently moving through the legislature. AB 755. This bill is also dead for the year. That would have increased the existing tire fee for the purchase of new tires from $1.75 per tire to $3.25, and that is to fund various stormwater improvements to aid in the capture and disposal of rainwater. And the connection they're making to that is because there's zinc in tires, there's zinc in our water. Yeah. Okay. AB 1468 imposes a $100 million tax on opioid distributors, manufacturers to pay for opioid prevention. There are Republicans in the North State that are supporting this measure as well. And in some respects, I understand that. The opioid crisis, not just in California, but also across the country, is a serious one, and it needs to be addressed. And frankly, I think it does need more funding, but you're going after the wrong people. You go after the distributors, the manufacturers, those costs are passed on to consumers. Most of whom, to be quite honest, use opioids perfectly legitimately to manage pain as they should. Nothing wrong with that. You want to tackle this, you go after the doctors. You go after the doctors, you go after the doctors, you go after the doctors. It's the only way to solve this. So that's the issue we have on that. SB 246 imposes a 10% oil severance tax. Oil severance would be taxing oil as it comes out of the ground. This is interesting. Most of you probably don't know this. Oil is in the ground. It is subject to property taxes. You pull it out of the ground, it is not subject to property taxes anymore. And that's when it would be hit with this 10% oil severance tax. Supporters argue that that this tax is appropriate because California is one of the only states that doesn't have an oil severance tax. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, we have the highest gas and car taxes in the United States. By the way, gas taxes go up another 5.5 cents next week, thanks to Senate Bill 1 and Prop 6, which voters rejected last November. We all knew this was in the measure. We all told y'all. You all voted yes on Prop 6. Not enough people did, though. Oil severance, SB 246, is dead for the year. The opioid tax is AB 1468. That is pending a vote on the Assembly floor. That has not come up yet, but again, that could come up at any time. SB 378 is another tax that hasn't even gotten a committee hearing this year, which would impose a state tax increase of 40% on estates ranging in value from $3.5 million to $11.4 million, and double those amounts for married couples. We oppose this obviously because it's a tax, but also because California voted to repeal its estate tax in 1982 by roughly a 2-to-1 margin. And that's why there needs to be an additional statewide vote to replace it. Because even though that was a statutory initiative back in 1982, anytime and this is in the California Constitution, anytime voters approve a statutory initiative, you need to pass another initiative to overturn that. So SB 378 increases the estate tax. If it passes out of the legislature, again, it would require a statewide vote of the people. And finally, SB 522 establishes a sales tax on business-to-business services.
Like what? Like what business-to-business services? Like what? Give me an example.
Yeah.
Under the current bill, pretty much anything. And obviously there would be exemptions to that. You know, basically, it's kind of like what's going on with the independent contractors right now. If you have enough money to be able to exempt yourself, you get an exemption. You know, so it's not gonna end up being that big a bill if it was ever, that hasn't even gotten a hearing yet either, so it's hard to know sort of what direction that's going in.
Now, when are they in recess?
Not soon enough, right? Not soon enough. So,
When do they go home?
When are they gonna move to part-time?
yeah, no, and that's, you know, honestly, that's liable not to happen either. We've actually done polling on a part-time legislature. It does not poll well, believe it or not. Yeah, so I think the issue with that is there would need to be a corresponding reduction in staff salaries, I think, for that to carry weight. And of course, no one's gonna do that.
Is Texas part-time?
Texas is part-time.
Is there any other?
Oh,
state
yeah, I mean,
legislatures? Are there?
Florida's part-time, my wife is from Florida, so
Idaho's part-time, I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
yeah.
So they have jobs when they go home, and
They
they got
do.
their jobs
They-
instead of
they-
just sitting there
They all do.
being a law.
I think part of the issue is define the proper role of government. Republicans don't even know how to do that. And I think part of the reason is it differs from person to person. You know, I mean, I have cerebral palsy.
It's not taught in our schools
Well,
anymore.
what I was
it's not.
thinking.
It's not. But, you know, I have cerebral palsy. I believe in probably a broader social safety net than the average Republican. You know, for that reason. You know, I got Department of Rehab money in college, which I took gladly because I knew I was going to be paying it double and triple times over in taxes. You know, my daughter has Medi-Cal now, following a $1.8 million NICU bill. I'm grateful for that. You know, so again, it differs based on who you talk to. But what is the proper role of government? You know, Jarvis hasn't really engaged on a lot of things pertaining to illegal immigration because we have our hands full enough with Prop 13. But listen, in this last budget, there was a bill basically expanding Medi-Cal to, and keep in mind, minors up to 18 are already covered, you know, to the tune of you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of general fund money a year. That was just expanded to the tune of a couple $100 million more to 18 to 25-year-olds. And the Senate had a proposal, which thankfully was not adopted, to cover immigrants, seniors over the age of 65. So we're basically slowly but steadily moving to a Medi-Cal for all system. And guys, this is a big deal because one third of the state is on Medi-Cal. Or Medicare.
Yeah.
But suffice to say, 1/3 of the state on Medi-Cal, whether they're legal or illegal or otherwise, is not good.
No.
You know, because you need to be low income enough to qualify for
Is that
that.
since the ACA went into effect because of the
So
threshold being?
the ACA was huge.
raised?
California obviously adopted, they were one of the few states to adopt the expanded ACA coverage that was optional that they didn't have to adopt. That alone, that expansion alone, and keep in mind, with the ACA, the feds have dropped off funding that. It's basically now all the states dropping money into that. And that was happening while Obama was in office. It was actually part of the ACA that the Fed funds over time would decline in terms of supplementing the states. But just the expansion of the ACA in California alone is $3 billion a year. It's probably higher than that now. Remember, listen, what goes up must come down. You know, there will be another recession. Our rainy day fund, I mean, and again, recession probably within the next 18 months. You know, maybe 2 years if you're lucky, but I think it's coming. And, you know, we have a rainy day fund right now of close to $20 billion. That gets us through 1 year. If we have a recession like we did in 2008, you're going to have to cut a lot of things back. And it is inevitable, and it is coming. You can fund all these things, and while the money's there, go ahead. But, you know, the money's not there. And it speaks to, I think, just a desire to want to be there for everyone and understanding people are in different walks of life and, you know, should be taken care of regardless of their immigration status. And I get that, but then take care of them. The Medi-Cal reimbursement rate for physicians is crap.
Oh, yes.
Is crap. If you're gonna take care of them, take care of them. But, you know, I mean,
You
it's
mean,
like,
Are you saying the government paying the doctors?
yeah.
Yeah.
They're not.
Oh, Medi-Cal reimbursement rates, especially in the Central Valley, are awful.
So will you just say, are they years behind or months behind? You
Oh,
won't
they're-
say
oh.
awful?
Percentage.
Well,
Well, there are physicians that won't take Medi-Cal.
right, there are plenty of.
I mean, not just because of the reimbursement rate, but because it takes months to get money. I mean, why would you? This legislature has shown, and this is the only thing I'm gonna say about this, with legislation this year, that they like getting involved with relationships between doctors and patients.
Very well said.
And I'll just leave it at that. So could that happen in the future? Sure it could, absolutely.
You mentioned something, David, about wanting a safety net for everybody, and I don't think anybody disagrees. Yeah, we want people
Sure.
to get help. But I think a lot of people are feeling, but we can't do that for the world. California cannot do it for the world.
No, and I'm not sitting here defending, let me make it very clear, I'm not sitting here defending illegal immigration. You know, not by a long stretch, but we have to remember too, it's a federal problem. It's a federal problem. And Congress, not just the president, but Congress too, needs to get involved in dealing with
Yeah,
this.
they're refusing to.
And a wall is not gonna be enough. The wall is a great talking point, guys, but it's not gonna be enough. There's chain migration issues, there's all sorts of things that need to be dealt with. I mean, expand if we really need workers,
Nancy Pelosi.
and evidently we do, expand the H-1B visa program. You know, where companies say, hey, I need workers, and they go vouch and vet for the workers, and they bring them in. If you want to create a program where companies are bringing in workers that have specific skills for specific projects at specific times, and they're working for a couple of years, and they're doing a good job, and you want to grant them citizenship at that point, go ahead. Let's do it that way. You know, that's the golden door in the wall that I think Donald Trump was talking about at one point. That's responsible and appropriate and humanitarian immigration. That's not what's happening now, though.
I was gonna ask you, how many employees are there at the Howard Jarvis Foundation?
Great question. We have two offices. We have one in Los Angeles and another one, obviously, in Sacramento. Our board of directors is mainly down in LA. Our CFO is in LA. We like to joke all the fun happens in Sacramento. All of our attorneys are in Sacramento. I'm in Sacramento dealing with the legislature. We have 8 on the payroll. We can't exist as an association without our members. And let me just give the membership pitch now before I forget, because why not? 95% of the money we take in comes from annual $15 membership dues. That's all we ask. That's all we've asked for years. I'm sure a lot of you are members. If you do enjoy what you've heard today, I would encourage you to become a member. I got brochures there. You can also go online, hjta.org, and sign up and give online. Listen, we can't do it without you. We have 150,000 members. So, but yeah, 90% of the money we take in comes from those annual $15 membership dues. A lot of people obviously give more than that, but, we're totally and purely a grassroots organization. Back to my point, we can't do it without you.
Right?
Especially local stuff, It's a state of 40 million people. We don't know what's going on.
Right.
I got my hands full enough with the Capitol.
Right. Are you at the Capitol every day?
Pretty close.
Yeah. And how are you received? I mean, do you get a chance to talk to both sides?
Oh, yeah.
You're talking
I've run sponsored bills with Democrats.
Okay.
4 or 5 sponsored bills with Democrats over the years.
So do you say run? You
Yeah.
said run bills. So those bills that Howard Jarvis has written, and
Well,
you're asking the legislature to run the bill for you because you present as a lobbyist, for lack of better terms, you've written the bill?
Yeah, so attorneys in the legislature draft the bills.
Yes.
When I say run, I mean we are the sponsor of the bill. We go out and we find the legislator to carry the bill. We testify on the bill. We do the background sheets on the bill.
That's how most bills are done.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not the legislator coming up with a bill, it's
Yeah,
an outside
90
source.
90+% of bills are sponsored, which means only 10% of bills are author-originated bills. You know, we've done a lot of sponsored bills. Trying to think one that comes to mind. We've done a lot of transparency-related issues. Prop 39 bonds, when they pass, bond oversight committees are set up. Okay? Now, as a part of a bond oversight committee, the district is required to do a financial and a performance audit every year. Prior to 2008, when we passed this bill, there was a district that passed a bond and set up a bond oversight committee and didn't do the required performance audit. They did the financial audit, but not the performance audit. Performance audit basically delves into individual projects and, you know, digs into their cost effectiveness, among other things. Didn't do a performance audit. Taxpayers took the district to court, and the judge was like, well, hey, where's your performance audit? The district rep took a financial audit, ripped the cover off of it, wrote performance audit on it, and because there were no requirements as to what constituted a legitimate performance audit in state statute, judge said that was okay. Our bill made it very clear what a performance audit was. Any accountants in the room? Okay. There is what's known as the Gagas Yellow Book Standards, which is pretty common for CPAs and accountants. Everyone knows what that is. It's basically the golden book for accountants. They have a section on performance audits. We basically said, hey, performance audits need to abide by this generally accepted, I think it is generally accepted good accounting standard Gagas practice, and got that bill signed into law. Good bill. You know.
Part of Prop 39?
Well,
As
not
a tag on or a writer, whatever.
well. So it's in statute. So it's in it's in the same statutory implementation section that implements Prop 39. You know. So I mean, there have been transparency bills like that, and we've gotten 10 signs since I've been at Jarvis. Bills like that cumulatively probably don't do a whole lot, but it's been a long night, guys.
Now,
Thank you.
you're too young. You were probably not around in 1978
No.
when Prop 13 went through. Those of you that were, remember, the whole state went for it, and suddenly Jerry Brown was for it. He had been against it. And when he saw all the voters going for it, Jerry just did a complete turnaround, and he was all for Prop 13. It was fun to watch, old Jerry.
They called him Jerry Jarvis at the time. So, but to be fair to him, and it's fascinating. That was not just a political thing. He stuck to that,
Right, yeah.
and he's stuck to it ever since. You know, 41 years later, he was still sticking to it on the way out the door. You know,
Still defending it.
he'd mutter things here or there, you know, to placate whatever, but he was always right there. And, you know,
You think Gavin Newsom is?
well, time will tell, right? It's a bitterly yet, and you know, Gavin, I think, needs to feel himself out on all sorts of different things. It's a complex state to govern, you know, and I fear when the next recession rolls around, what they start coming after, because there's not a lot to come after. You know, we already have the highest income tax in the nation, highest sales tax in the nation, highest gas and car tax in the nation, highest corporate taxes in the western United States. You know, there's not a lot of room to push anymore.
The day is
So
long.
there were a lot of things striking out against Prop 6. I mean, obviously we were outspent 10-1. That was the first strike. That was pretty detrimental. You know, those television ads against Prop 6 were frankly pretty good.
They're very good.
They were very effective. I will never forget my wife voting in her first election since moving here from Florida. We met online in a Christian Facebook group, and I dragged her out here. And she's like, why did I come out here?
You should want to come to Florida.
Because you love me. And because I have a decently well-paying job. But, I will never forget her looking at the ballot title and summary for Prop 6
Yeah.
on the ballot. And I had not told her anything about that or anything. And she's like, you guys are so screwed. Because nowhere in there did it mention repeal of taxes.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
No.
So yeah, ballot titles and summary need to be written by either the Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office or some other group. And we continue to support legislation to do exactly that. Because listen, I don't want Becerra writing ballot titles and summaries. I don't want Dan Lundgren, who was the last Republican Attorney General, writing ballot titles and summaries either.
Neutral person.
It's not a partisan thing. So yeah, so no, there were a lot of things striking out against Prop 6. You could also throw ballot harvesting in there, I think, to some extent. You know, with 66% voter turnout, that obviously had something to do with it too. I'm not gonna say, you know, large swaths of those voters were legitimate. I don't think there was enough ballot harvesting done to sway any one specific election. But does it exist? Of course it exists. Absolutely. So, but listen, I think even beyond all that, I do think voters do want higher taxes.
I do too, especially here in California,
I
they do.
I do absolutely think that they do.
Yeah.
And it's not just with Prop 6 where we're seeing that. We saw it with Prop 30 and Prop 65, both of which obviously imposed income taxes on higher earners, but also there was a sales tax component in both of those that impacted everyone. You know, and those passed relatively easily. So we're moving down a trend line here that is not good, and I think the wake-up point, I don't think it happens anytime soon. I think Republicans continue to lose seats in 2020, unfortunately. You know, but I think the tipping point comes from this. Net domestic outmigration right now is about 100,000 people a year.
What is, I'm sorry?
Net domestic outmigration.
Net
Net
migration.
domestic outmigration. So
Out
more
of
people
California.
leaving California than moving in. The state population, we've lost about,
Oh, we're gaining all the homes.
yeah, so we've lost about 1.5 million people over the last 15 years.
So why do we need more houses? Can they just move in?
Well,
and live
because,
That's a
Oh,
good
they
point.
leave.
because the population continues to increase.
Oh, yeah, that's right, there's
Legal
that
immigration.
part.
Legal and illegal
Yeah.
immigration.
People having children.
Population
Yeah.
continues
Yeah, people have babies, that really,
Oh,
really
that's
makes a big
right.
difference.
Population
Thought
continues
that
to
different
increase.
Like you've created a new California.
I have. Well, 2 actually, if you
Two.
tell my wife, right?
Oh, that's
So,
right. Yeah, you're out here,
see,
yeah.
I'm doing my part.
Thank you,
Listen,
sir. Thank
You're
you.
welcome, you're welcome. I'm
Totally
improving the
rude.
tax base. But yeah, we'll be up to 40 million people this year. But, you know, growth was at its lowest in a decade. I think it was up 0.2% year over year in the figures that just came out. And what's interesting is the people who are leaving. We all think it's the high income earners, guys, that are leaving, but it's not actually true. LAO, Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office, go dig around on their website. It's kind of fun, the data they put out. They did a study earlier this year that showed people actually making over $200,000 a year and up are actually net moving into California.
That's what I
Net,
heard
net.
recently.
So the people moving out are those making $90,000 and under. They are net moving out. Those are your families. And, you know, but you do still need the housing. When it costs $330,000 on average to build a unit of affordable housing in the state of California, now we talked about CEQA, we talked about all sorts of other things. That's ridiculous. It costs almost half that in Portland. Not in conservative Mecca, Portland, I might add. It's insane. In San Francisco, they're redeveloping Candlestick Park. A unit of housing there, $800,000. A unit of affordable housing in that specific part of San Francisco. Renters right now, a third of renters spend half their take-home pay on rent. The median home price in the state of California, median, is $550,000. We're roughly right back where we were prior to 2008. Guys, it's unsustainable. And that's why, again, affordable housing is the biggest issue facing the state. Now, government has a role to play in that. Mainly, they need to get the heck up out of the way. Solar panels on new home development, unacceptable. Repealing Costa-Hawkins and establishing rent control, as Prop 10 tried to do last year, unacceptable. Permit costs all over the place, unacceptable. You know, a lack of CEQA reform, unacceptable. There was a housing bond that was passed, great. You know, there should be some state money, I think, involved in fixing this affordable housing issue. But if it costs $330,000 to build a unit of affordable housing, how far is a $5 billion housing bond gonna get you? When it costs double the money to pay that off. You know, people forget general obligation bonds have first call on general fund revenue, right? So a $5 billion housing bond costs about $200 million a year of general fund revenue to pay off each and every year for 30 years.
I think a lot of
You
people
know.
think bonds are
Free money.
they're free, you know, you don't have to worry about them, they're gonna.
Especially
pay that.
renters,
Yeah.
the people who aren't paying those
That's right.
property tax.
Yeah, no, bonds are not free. Anyway, guys, I could go on all night. I'm sure
Yeah.
y'all want to go home.
Yeah.
Hopefully this was encouraging. Thank you guys so much.
Well, it's very
Thank you.
incredibly
Educational.
educational.
Yeah, thank you very much.